What stops a person who cannot be stopped? 25 centuries ago, in the kingdom of Kosala, there was a forest road no one walked alone. The road ran from the city of Sāvatthī into the wild country to the north, and a young man with a sword had taken it for his own. This story is preserved in the 86th discourse of the middle-length sayings, the Angulimala Sutta, and in the verses Angulimala himself composed, kept by the monks who walked beside him afterward. It is one of the strangest stories in the canon, because the man at the center of it had killed many, and because by the end of the morning that this story takes place, he had stopped. To understand how, you have to understand what kind of man he was first. His name was Angulimala. The name means garland of fingers, and that is what he wore. A string around his neck, made from a cord and small curling fragments cut from the hands of those he had killed. Each one a person, each one a counted number, kept against some private vow whose origin the canon does not record. He had been before this a young man of promise, a student of Brahmins, strong, intelligent, capable. Something had turned in him, something the canon hints at without explaining. By the time the story reaches us, he was no longer the man he had been. He was something the road feared. The villagers who lived near the forest road would not enter it alone. Travelers would not enter it at all. Merchants who once passed through with caravans began to take the long way around, adding days, adding cost, adding inconvenience to every shipment that moved through that part of the country. The villages on the forest's edge had begun to empty. First the children, taken to family in safer towns, then the women, then the old. By the time the canon picks up the story, whole settlements had been left to the dust and the wind, the doors of their houses standing open, the courtyards quiet. In the city of Sāvatthī, King Pasenadi heard the reports. At first scattered, then frequent, then constant. He readied his army. He gave the order. A force was gathering to ride into the forest and finish what one young man had been doing alone. The soldiers polished their armor. The horses were brought to the gate. This is who Angulimala was and what was coming for him on the morning the story turns. A man feared by a kingdom, a road no one walked, an army being readied, and walking out into the forest from a different direction, alone, unaccompanied, without a sword, without an escort, without even a stick. A monk in saffron robes. The Buddha had been staying in the grove outside Sāvatthī. That morning, after his alms round, he set out on the forest road, alone, without escort, without urgency. A cowherd saw him on the road and called out, "Honored sir, do not go that way. There is a man in this forest. Even 10 travelers together do not pass, even 20. The Buddha walked on. A farmer at the forest's edge stopped his work and called out, "Honored sir, go back. There is a killer in this forest." The Buddha walked on. A woman gathering wood at the path's edge looked up, saw the saffron robe, and lowered her bundle. "Honored sir," she said, "please, not this road." The Buddha thanked her with a small inclination of the head and walked on. He walked at his ordinary pace. He did not hurry. He did not slow. The road was the same to him as any road he had walked. He went into the forest the way a person goes home. Angulimala was sitting on a rise above the path when he saw him, a single figure moving up the road, a monk, alone, with no companion. The sun on the saffron of his robe, the slow, regular rhythm of unhurried feet. He stood up. He did not understand what he was seeing. He had killed travelers in groups, travelers in pairs, travelers who had hired guards for the road. He had killed men who had come into the forest expressly to find him. He had not yet, in all of his counting, killed a man who was alone, and no one who knew the road, would walk it alone. Yet here on the path beneath him was a man walking alone. Angulimala stood and watched him for a long time. The monk did not look up. The monk did not appear to know he was being watched. The monk only continued at the same slow pace, moving up the road. Angulimala picked up his sword. He stepped down onto the path behind him, and he gave chase. He ran. The forest narrowed. The path twisted between roots and stones. The sound of his own breath was in his ears, and the sound of his feet on the packed earth, and the sound of his heart pounding against his ribs, and beneath all of it the sound of one set of slower feet, ahead of him, moving steadily up the road. The monk walked. Angulimala ran. The distance between them did not close. He had stopped birds in mid-flight. He had caught the running deer. But this monk walking, he could not catch. He ran harder. The path went uphill, and his legs were strong, and he had spent his life on this road. He knew every turn, every fallen log, every place a man might cut across to gain ground. He cut across. He ran the diagonal. He came back to the path, ahead of where the monk should have been. The monk was still ahead of him. He had stopped birds in mid-flight. He had caught the running deer. But this monk walking, he could not catch. He ran longer. The sweat ran down his back and soaked the cord at his neck. The garland at his neck pulled with the rhythm of his stride, the small curling fragments knocking against his collarbone with each step. The sword in his hand grew heavy, and then heavier still, until it was no longer the same sword he had picked up at the start of the morning. He ran. He could not catch him. The monk did not look back. The monk did not change his pace. The monk did not seem to know he was being chased. There was no fear in the line of his shoulders. There was no quickening in his stride. He walked as a man walks who is going somewhere by daylight, on a road he knows with no urgency. He had stopped birds in mid-flight. He had caught the running deer. But this monk walking, he could not catch. He ran until the strength went out of his legs. He ran until the breath in his chest was no longer breath, but burning. He ran until something in him understood, somewhere underneath the running, that no amount of running was going to close the distance. That the distance was not a distance of paces, that the monk was not a monk who could be caught the way he had caught everyone else. And then finally, he stopped. He stood in the road, breathing hard. The monk was perhaps 50 paces ahead of him, walking on. Angulimala called out, the first word he had spoken to him, a single word hurled forward like the last thing he had left. Stop, monk. Stop. The Buddha kept walking. Angulimala called again. Stop. The Buddha turned. He did not draw closer. He did not move away. He stood on the path, and his face was as it had been at the village edge, and at the cowherd's field, and at the forest's first turning, quiet, unalarmed. And he said, I have stopped, Angulimala. You stopped too. The words were not loud. They were not raised. The monk had not even slowed his breath. Angulimala stood very still. He had spoken the word stop as a command. The word a hunter speaks to the thing he intends to kill. The word he had spoken to many travelers on this road. The word that had always meant only one thing. The monk had given the word back to him and meant something else. Angulimala heard the question form in him before he could ask it, and he asked it, his voice still ragged from the running. You walk, and yet you tell me you have stopped. I stand here, holding the sword, and you call me the one who has not stopped. What do you mean? And the Buddha answered him, plainly, without raising his voice, as one man answering another on a forest road in the late morning. I have stopped, Angulimala. I have stopped harming any living being. I lay down the rod against all that breathes. I do not strike. I do not take. I do not kill. The body of mine that you see walking, it is walking, yes. But the part of me that once caused harm, that part has stopped, and it has stopped forever. You still walk in violence. The body of yours that I see standing, it is standing, yes. But the part of you that takes from the living, that part has not yet stopped. So I have stopped, and you have not. Stop, Angulimala. Lay it down. You can stop too. The words landed in him like stones dropped into a deep well, slowly, and one after the other, and each one going further down than the last. I have stopped. The man who walks the road and does not harm, you have not. The man who stands holding the sword, he looked at the sword in his hand. He looked at the garland at his neck, the cord he had counted, the fragments he had taken. He looked at the monk on the road, 50 paces off, who had walked through the forest without fear and without a weapon, and had spoken to him as if he were a man and not a thing. Something he had not heard in a long time opened in him, a door, a small one, in a place he had thought sealed shut. He took a step forward. There was a chasm at the side of the road where the forest fell away into a deep cut between two rocks. Angulimala walked to the edge of it. He took the sword in both hands and he threw it. The blade turned once in the air and went down into the chasm and was gone. He took the garland from around his neck, the cord and the small curling fragments, and let it fall after the sword. He walked back to the path and he knelt before the Buddha and he asked to be received. The canon does not record what he said. It records only that he asked and that the Buddha said yes. The man who had been Angulimala rose. His head was shaved, his sword was gone, his garland was gone, and the two of them began to walk. They walked together out of the forest, down the slope, through the place where the cow herd had warned him, past the field where the farmer had stopped his work, by the path's edge where the woman had lowered her bundle of firewood. None of them was there now. The morning had moved on. They walked the road back toward Sāvatthī, the city in the distance, low against the pale sky. The road empty in front of them, two figures at the same pace, neither ahead, neither behind. The man who had been a killer was now a man walking. The man who had walked into the forest alone was no longer walking alone. And what the city would say when it saw him, what the world would do with a man who had been remade, is the next part of the story.